Good evening, everyone. Good evening, curious people of the internet. This is Seda Reda speaking at the Entrepreneur's Kitchen. We have another exciting and really important episode tonight. We are going to be talking about racism. And we're going to be talking about racism with two experts who have done amazing work at the front lines of the academic world when it comes to work on racism and modern day slavery, actually. So we have on the other side of the line in Iowa, Ashley Howard, the assistant professor at the University of Iowa for African American Studies. Hello, Ashley.
Hello.
So lovely to have you here. And also a longtime friend, Laura Murphy. She has written 2 books on modern day slavery. Laura, hello, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And you're right now in New Orleans, but you usually live in the UK. You're a professor at the Sheffield Hallam University. So lucky to have you in the more or less a similar time zone. So we can make this actually happen. Well, let's just jump right into the discussion. But before that, let me please tell the people watching our stream tonight, you can ask questions and you can ask honest questions here at this show. Just tune into Sly.do. And our event number is 73628. Yes, 73628. So if you guys have any questions on the issues we're going to be discussing tonight, please tune in to Slido to ask us questions. Well, actually, I think there are a lot of misconceptions or a lot of misunderstandings around the term. What is racism? What is racism?
Oh, it's so many things, right? But at its core, racism is the system of structured hierarchy that some people are afforded benefits because of their skin or their ethnicity, and other people are denied those benefits because of those same things. And I think a lot of people get caught up in this idea that racism is just one person not liking another person. But in the case of America, and frankly, globally, it's all interwoven into our institutions, into our structures, into the whole of our life and systems.
I think that people often get racism confused with sort of everyday discrimination. Like I can discriminate against you because you're tall or because you're short. I can discriminate against you because you're rich or because you're poor. But racism at its heart is about the power dynamic between the people who are in the dominant category in the US, white people, and the people who are not, right? It's that system of power that makes that differentiation have real effects in the world, whereas discrimination is usually between 2 people and can often be against the dominant class, right? Against rich people. You don't maybe discriminate against rich people. You don't want them to hang out with you. You don't want them to be, at your parties. But racism is about that structure of power. Am I right, Ashley?
Agreed, completely. And that's the structure that I think we've seen this pushback in the past, 2 weeks, but over the long history. It's that pushback that a Black person could be stopped by the police and knelt on for 9 minutes, right? That's not a fear many other Americans have, but that's a particular fear that Black Americans have, and a structure that supports that type of discrimination and blaming the person who was killed and not the system at hand. Agreed?
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend today on the phone, and she says, while educating your Black children in the US, you teach them stuff like, if you're at the candy section of a supermarket, do not put your hands in your pockets, because people just might come at you and stop you, and ask you questions around what do you have in your pocket. So that is systemic racism. But how does systemic racism actually manifest itself really in our day-to-day life? How can we point at that? How can we know that it's interwoven into our thinking, into our upbringing, and how can we break that?
I think for many people, it's a complete decentering of their experience, right? And so, the case of the bird watcher in New York City, Chris Cooper, right? Everybody thinks that he did something wrong because he said, you may not like what happens next. And so what they are often ignoring is how Amy Cooper said, I'm going to get 911 and say that a Black man, an African-American man, is harassing me, right? She's gaming the system. She knows that if she just says those 2 words, the response is going to be immediate. So I think a lot of people have to take a step back and decentering themselves and think, well, this is the reason I've been told this is happening, but what is actually happening, coming from a place of understanding and not just knowing.
And a lot of times you can see that just in whatever situation you work in. For instance, if you're working in an office, you can start to look around and say, how is it exactly that this is a white dominated industry, or this is a white dominated office? Is it truly because there are just no Black people who are engineers? Right? No, we know that that's not the case, right? And so then you start thinking about all the systems that influence people in their everyday decisions to make it so that even today in 2020, we have, corporations that are like, like 95% of Fortune 500 companies are run by white people. It might be 99% actually. And so when we look at those things, we can just sort of take it for granted. Oh, well, that's just how things go as white people. But when you start to really look at it and you realize that this is not about individuals necessarily making day-to-day decisions, I won't hire Black people, but a larger system that from childhood is leading to these like various different forms of discrimination that make it possible for whole industries to be dominated by white people, and our governments to be dominated by white people, etc.
And would you then say it's also white people's responsibility to fix the system and not just, sit there and say, well, I'm not a racist, I'm okay?
Yeah, hell yes. Yeah. I mean, we have to, first of all, we created this garbage. And so it's on us to deal with it. And one of the things I often say when I talk about slavery, I work on historical and contemporary forms of slavery. And one of the things I say is, I'm not guilty of having enslaved anyone myself, right? So I don't walk around carrying guilt about slavery that happened in the past, personal guilt. What I walk around with is, one, a sense of the legacies of that past and the way they've affected my life and the way I've been privileged as a result of them. And two, a responsibility to make sure that kind of stuff isn't happening anymore and that we're undoing those legacies. So I think a lot of people get bogged down. Like, a lot of white people are like, well, I didn't cause this and I didn't make this happen. And I also suffer sometimes, right? But, your suffering isn't due to your due to your race, but your privilege is. And so like thinking about how you undo those things on like an individual level, and then how you sort of take it to, the places that your spheres of influence, and how you vote so that you can address the layers, at the legislative level. We have a responsibility to do something, and it's like, it's not rocket science, and this is the thing that makes me crazy. There are daily, everyday things you can do to look around, assess the field, recognize your privilege, and try to address it and undo it, like right in your own house, all the way to like who you vote for and how legislation works, etc.
Yeah, and Ashley, I know that you say, not being a racist is not enough. We have to be actively, anti.
It's right. What we're witnessing here in 2020, while it has, some echoes of the uprisings and protests that we see in the 1960s in the American context, this is a whole new day. And you can no longer just be on the sidelines and watch it happen. You can't just, call on your one Black friend and pretend that you're down, right? You have to think of exactly the things that Laura is talking about here in the ways that people are benefiting from these systems, even when they're not actively promoting a racist agenda. And I think about like what it actually means to be an anti-racist. For me, like what I want to see white people do is to be co-conspirators, right? Not just allies. Because when you're an ally, you can, play around in the revolution, and then when it gets too hot, you can go out. And so like that for me is when people put their own safety, their own security, their own privilege on the line to make something happen, then that groundswell is what actually brings about radical change, which is what we so desperately need.
But changing the minds of the people starts also, would you agree? In my opinion, it also starts with changing how we talk about things, and that we are finally honest about talking about things. And, and also in certain contexts, people actively avoid, avoid being in a very hot discussion, let's say, okay? Because discourse, informed discourse even, is something that people are really afraid of today, because you never know, it might be used against you. So people became these passive, we support you, yes, and we never use certain words, but, maybe, do we really honestly talk about these things with each other? Even, your one Black friend, and you call them and you're like, I feel your pain, but is it really?
Right. Those honest conversations are so difficult to have because people are vulnerable. They're vulnerable in sharing their pain. They're vulnerable in maybe being the cause of that pain, directly or indirectly. And I think those comments are really hard. And I think one of the really positive things that we've seen with social media is those discussions that have been happening in Black communities, Black churches, Black barbershops, front porches, wherever, now also have a larger audience, right? And people are beginning to key into it and hear that language in a way that they've been able to ignore or write off before.
I think we shouldn't downplay how challenging and how painful these conversations can sometimes be, and how scary I think it is for a lot of people to talk about race. Ashley and I are both like educated and in racial discourse. We spend a lot of time thinking about these questions. We spend a lot of time talking to each other. We're buddies, and we like, it's kind of strange for me because in some ways it's unusual. It's hard for me to imagine that that's not what everybody's talking about. Right. It seems to me to be the most important thing happening in this country. And I work on Africa, and I think it's, super important there, history of colonialism, et cetera. So I sometimes think, well, everybody's talking about this. But when I talk to my students, they white students, they often lack a vocabulary for talking about race, and they recognize that they could mess up, and they recognize that they want to do better, right? Lots of my students want to do better. The way people talked in their houses, their parents, they knew was racist and they knew was problematic, but they have other models. So in some ways, education is part of that. Talking to people, white people and Black people, and people of all races who have some facility talking about this, who are willing to take the risk and say, here are the ways we talk about things. These are the mistakes I sometimes make. And I think that admission that sometimes I'm going to make a mistake, and sometimes I'm going to get called out for it, and that's going to hurt. Like, it makes my stomach hurt sometimes when people say, we don't say it that way anymore. Or did you realize the history of that term? This has happened to me throughout my life, and it hurts and it's terrifying. And I'm like, oh, that's not how I think of myself.
Yeah.
And so it's scary for young people. But there's a way in which we can sort of model that discourse. And Ashley's right. They can just turn to Twitter or social media and see Black people talking about it, and see that there are actually debates in that field too.
But I really want to address one very important aspect of all of this. We agree. How do you talk to people who are the opposite of what you say? So I think that is, or how do you listen to them even? How do you stomach their argumentation? To really delve in a real discussion about your side, my side, because I think sometimes I feel like, we since we all agree, so the world should be fine. But obviously there's a whole other, thing in this whole discussion. So how, it's not about converting, but how do we find the means and also the stamina to go in there and to really show them, this is bigger than us. This is us being one humanity. This is going to transcend, everything, and let's be on the right side of the history,
I mean, obviously I have like a dog in this fight because I'm a historian, but this is a problem, right? So many people don't know history. I was on the street the other day and I was walking past and some people had, tagged up graffiti. And this man's, was talking about how he's been at the protests and he's been at the rallies, and if people just vote. And I was just like, wait a second. And then had to kind of enumerate for him all the different ways that Black votes have been suppressed, not just in 1935 or 1975, but 2 weeks ago in the election in Georgia, right? And so like, I feel, again, so many people just think they know. And I mean, I was a little salty about it anyhow, because I was like, when I tell you I'm an expert on this, believe me, and he's like, but I heard. And I think that is the key to having these discussions. Hush, right? And listen to people who have experience, not just book knowledge, but also lived experience. Listen to them and don't try to rationalize away when they're telling you something unfamiliar. Try to put it back on your frames. I think, as kindergartners are told, mouths closed, ears open. That kind of thing when you're beginning to have these kind of conversations. Absolutely.
By the way, Laura, before you move on, I really want to hear your perspective, but we totally forgot the food.
You can change that.
Yeah, so I know
we're having late lunch here. It's 2 p.m. here, so we're chomping. I'm ready.
Great.
Awesome. So Laura, and actually this was your idea. So we're doing what you guys call a plate. Can you explain, please?
Oh. Plate is your refrigerator's gift to you. So basically, this is a quick and easy meal. You can throw together with whatever's in your fridge or in your cupboard. And what's brilliant is it takes the leftovers of what you have, and by presenting it on plate, it makes it look fancy and it's delicious. And the one rule of plate is when you're done making plate, you have to take a picture of it and send it to all of your friends so they will be jealous of your creation.
So this is why you guys bombarded me with all sorts of pictures, because you're like, we're doing plate, of course. Let's do, and then immediately I got so many pictures. So you already had lots in the disposal. Awesome.
I won't say this isn't our first plate rodeo. It's true.
Really great. So yes, Laura, I want to hear your perspective on the how to be able to just lend an ear to the other side.
So I think when you think about somebody like my Uncle Buddy, I think a lot of white folks have an Uncle Buddy. Uncle Buddy is a racist, and like, this is going to be on TV, and I'm cool with that. Uncle Buddy's a racist, and he doesn't really hear what I have to say. And I think that there are a few times in life where I have just let go. Like, Uncle Buddy is old and he's not going to learn. But for very few exceptions, right? That dude is going to be a racist, but his daughter isn't, and his son isn't, and his wife might not be. And so, so these conversations sometimes feel futile, but typically they're not. Like, because I'm a teacher, I believe that people are educable. They can be educated, right? And so, and I've seen other people change. I've seen whole cultures change. I mean, think about when we were kids, people didn't wear seatbelts when they were driving the car. It was, and no one could even imagine. It was ridiculous. Like, people laughed at it. But then they changed the law, and people started wearing seatbelts, and now you don't even think about getting in the car without wearing a seatbelt. People change. I believe in that. But racism is more deeply entrenched than non-seatbelt wearing, right? And so I always rely on the fact that I'm right when I'm talking to a racist. That's helpful, right? I'm right. I'm just right. And so I've got
Absolutely.
that. And I think that, Ashley's right that reading books is not enough. We need to listen. And so if you are an engaged white person who's thinking about, I'm not talking about white people, so weird. But that's not what I usually talk about. But if you're an engaged white person who's thinking about reading social media, thinking about the language, the discourse of race, and reading books and learning things about the history of race. If you read something like The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, I forgot there's a book that's written by a white guy. You have to remind me, Ashley, you might remember. It's a very small book. And he came to Loyola, huh?
Oh, Tim Wise.
Tim Wise. That book is written by a white guy and explains to white people how to kind of understand the history of racism and how white privilege manifests itself. There's also there are tons of books like this that I've found useful for finding the kinds of facts that white dudes find convincing. And those are the things that I present, right? Like if I'm having a conversation with my more radical friends, I might talk to them about defunding the police. But if I'm talking to racist Uncle Buddy, I might just explain the way African Americans were systematically cut out of the GI Bill, things that he relates to, how they were cut out of housing opportunities, how they were, how many of their jobs were cut out of fair labor standards. So kinds of things are things that he can latch onto and recognizes he benefited from and didn't realize that Black people have been systematically cut out of. And that kind of reading and those kinds of facts often get denied while they're sitting there talking to you, but it plants a seed. They go home and they're like, that's not true. They're not gonna say to you to your face, oh my God, you're right. Tell me more. That's rarely happened. But for people who are really hardcore against this kind of thinking, but you plant a seed and people go home and they think,
maybe there's truth.
I learned that Uncle Buddy thinks that what happened to George Floyd was wrong. I learned that Uncle Buddy thinks that protests are justified. This was a shock to me. So these seeds do grow into something. I'm not saying that I changed the
I mean, we managed once, right? We managed to pass laws. We managed to change and live according to the interpretation to another interpretation of the Constitution in the U.S. We managed to change things. Ashley, what was the spirit, and how was it different, or is it different from today? So white folks did manage to change things, and what do you think we need to do now for a better world?
It wasn't just white folks who changed things.
Well, that's part of it. I was like, and this is so complicated because historically and today, it's Black people, it's people of color who are out in the streets and putting their lives at risk, fighting for this. But as we know, these systems, these structures are controlled by white people. And so what does it take to convince those folks to change what they're doing? And so in the 1960s, there was a lot of public pressure. There was the context of the Cold War and Russia constantly calling out America on being the land of the free, right? Even though it was straight up racist. You had cities being uncomfortable because they couldn't have business as usual because people were out in the streets. And you had people continually agitate for decades. I think about the Montgomery bus boycott. Everybody thinks Rosa Parks was just some tired old lady, right, who sat down. Parks was an organizer. She built up the infrastructure, the training to make the bus boycott work. And this bus boycott was not a day-long event. It lasted for a year. So it was tons of people who had to come together to make it happen. And so that's what I think are some of the lessons and some of the thoughts that we need to take away today. People are uncomfortable. They're getting called out on social media. They are having their buildings defaced. They can't go back to work. They are being publicly shamed. And so it is because that constant pressure, that constant agitation that makes people want to do it. And I think what tangibly what we can do is find out what local grassroots, preferably BIPOC, right, people of color, Black, Indigenous people are doing in your community and get on board with their objectives, right? So there are people putting forth demands and grievances. Ask them how you can support and how you can get in on that groundwork that they've been working towards and implementing for years.
Ashley, if we were to apply the laws as they are, and if we were to, take the racism out of the system itself, would our problems be solved?
I don't think there's a way to take the racism out of the system, right? Like if we just take the example of police in the United States have always served the function of repressing and controlling people on the margins, whether they be racial margins, gender margins, sexuality, immigrant status, all of these things, the police have functioned to do that. So in their inception as an institution, they function to suppress people. And it's an unpopular thing to say, but America was built on racism. Like we literally paid the debt for the Revolutionary War on slavery, right? With the unpaid labor of enslaved Africans. So I don't think we can break that apart, but I'm so hopeful. What we can actually do is begin to rethink those systems, right? And begin to think about how can we make those laws equitable? How can we make structures that are by their very nature racist? How can we make them serve the people?
I have a very speculative question. Sorry, can I ask this question and then you can maybe
please.
So if we were to add something like the female quotient that is applied in larger companies, for instance, today, right? So you have to have a certain amount of gender diversity in your teams, for instance, because it's weird not to have it. Right. So would you think that we need like measurements of these kinds, for instance?
I mean, I think that might be one indication, but I don't think it would be the solution, right? So this was kind of this idea. In fact, Cornel West was talking about it a few weeks ago, of Black faces in high spaces, right? As soon as we get a Black mayor, a Black president, a Black CEO, poof, racism has existed. And we know that's not the case, right? This kind of first wave of millennial uprisings, Ferguson, Baltimore, happened with a Black president, a Black attorney general, and in the case of Baltimore, a Black mayor and a Black chief of police, right? So I don't think that's enough. And those kind of, that checkbox of just filling the space, that's just kind of a liberal reform, right? It doesn't actually excavate the nasty root of that problem, which is racism.
And this gets what I was about to say too, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
This gets at what I was about to say too, that, I mean, one of the things we have to remember is that so much the law is about criminality. It's about defining what constitutes a crime, defining what punishment happens when that crime is committed. And that pretty much focuses our attention on individual actors. So it asks us to think about, like, what does it mean to create, to commit a hate crime, for instance? What does it mean to, to discriminate in the workplace? It's, first of all, it's reactive. It's already happened by the time the law gets called upon to work. And it's also very much about naming crimes instead of naming systems, naming individual offenses rather than undoing the entire system. So those laws need to be there, but those laws are not proactive changes to the system that need to be made. We can have policies and procedures that happen at local levels that have a much greater systemic change, like, people are talking about defunding or radically reorganizing police work and the work of public safety, for instance. That doesn't necessarily take a law, right? That takes a full reorganization, rethinking of how systems work and how systems work better. And
Mhm.
so that may not come from a state or federal or even local law. That may come from a community of people getting together, and instead of thinking about what are the crimes that might be committed and how do we punish the people who do it, thinking about how do we get into a system that rethinks how we constitute crime, how we rethink who constitute, who we think are of as criminal, and who we think is, should be responding to mental health crises and any number of other things that are not really the purview of the law.
Very, very cool. Well, guys, there are questions coming in.
Oh yeah,
very,
really.
really.
Our plates, because I feel like we need to show off our plates.
I completely agree.
I can't take a picture.
Yeah, no, we will totally look.
Okay.
Oh, you have more than 3 ingredients. On
I did.
That's in our fridge.
Yes, well.
I figured we were exempted from the 3 ingredient rule because it was just whatever you had in the fridge anyway.
I agree. And we can lump them into categories like the veg category.
We're going to take the pictures, and it's going to be, so you guys had salami and really fancy things, and you're I just had some tomatoes and some cheese and some, how do you call this? Radicchio?
Radish.
Yes.
We have those too. That cheese and tomato too.
But we sent you pictures. You should have known what you were getting into.
Yeah, well, I know. I know.
And also, I'm going camping next week, and so this is both the best and the worst time for plate. So there's not a lot left in my fridge except for all these kind of random things. So it's hard to put together something that I really want to eat, and yet I need to eat everything that is there. So I just have a little bit of everything that's left in the fridge.
Well, you guys hacked it beautifully, and I'm really happy. And since it's the 3 of us today, hey, look at us. We have a perfect diversity, and we're all female. How awesome is that? So obviously you can talk about these things also in the right gender combination. Well, by the way, maybe I should mention that I am Turkish. So, different kinds of racism, me being referred as a Turk in the group, which Europeans have no issues addressing with the Turkish lady. So, well, you kind of learn to live with this, but then you suddenly realize it's actually not okay to be referred as, that. So you have to sensitize also yourself, in terms of this is okay, this is not okay. But then every now and then you receive a comment like, oh, you're being too sensitive. Why would you be so sensitive? And so it's always, this really fine, delicate balance. Huh?
You want to respond with, why would you be such a jerk?
Absolutely.
Why is it about me being sensitive? Why do you want to be a jerk?
I know, right? Exactly. Well, there is a question, really interesting. Is there unconscious racism? Being racist without knowing it? If so, does that come from a lack of self-observation?
That's a great question. I think, yes, absolutely, there's unconscious racism and other forms of unconscious bias. Does it come from a sense of not knowing yourself? I mean, perhaps, but it also comes because we are living in societies that allow that unconscious racism just to happen, right? And because it's the norm, right? And you have to actively go forth and challenge it and question what you're seeing in order to kind of disrupt those narratives.
Really, really great question. Really, really good question. So another one. Can a bi-party system based on hierarchy and class be the basis for a reform fighting racism? Don't we need some more diversity than Republican versus Democrat?
Yes. Next one. Excellent contribution.
Yes.
Yeah. What would, yeah, go ahead.
Laura?
I'll say, in my opinion, though, now is not the time to fight that because it's so important to get Trump out of the White House, at least, in the US context. I'm willing to wait 6 months for that revolution. But a 2-party system is clearly diminishing, reducing the kind of debate we can have in the US, that's clear. But really right now I'm 100%, get our military dictator out.
Hear, hear.
Yeah. Well, guys, I mean, it's been 35 minutes already. Yeah, isn't it awesome? I want to ask one last question, and I already hinted at this. So we have spoken about what kinds of actions we have to take. Now we might need to take, but we really have to actively now start taking. We have spoken about, this concept of the language and the unconscious racism that comes with the surroundings in which you're growing up. Like it is here referring someone as the Turk, or as the Syrian, or as the other. So that we need to kind of really find a language that's more sensitive around these issues. But there is a theory that says after a certain hierarchical status in the society, many of these problems diminish, or they even disappear. Like sometimes female leaders don't want to talk about female leadership because they don't want to be put in a certain drawer. Is that also within the Black community a similar thing, that certain Black leaders, especially in entrepreneurial circles, don't want to be associated with any racial injustice discourse?
I think there's certainly a tendency there, and there's been a rising swell of Black conservatives who kind of believe in this bootstrapping ideology that they got where they got in spite of racism, and you can too. Mm-hmm. We know is not the case for so many. But I think it's important to acknowledge the hierarchies, not only racially, but also within the Black community. So thinking about levels of education, thinking about levels of class, thinking about if you identify as a transgendered person, if you identify as a queer person, if you are documented, right? If you're an American citizen, all of those levels of hierarchy within the Black community also affect how people experience their racism. But regardless of who you are, if you are perceived as Black in America, your life is at threat. Yeah, definitely.
Laura, you want to add anything?
No.
Wait, what? Yeah. So I want to thank you guys so much. I think this has been a very interesting conversation. I've learned a lot, definitely. And now I know kind of where to start, but where should other people start if they want to actively contribute to the discourse?
Laura, you want to take that?
I think it depends on where you are. If this is sort of a new set of concepts that you're engaging, or a new sort of self-awareness you're coming to, I think reading is really important. I think a lot of people are laughing right now at how many white folks are reading books right now, but everybody's reading books. The New York Times bestseller list for nonfiction, all top 10 books this week were books about race and racism. It's like a dream for us. Best case scenario is that we don't have a job anymore after this, right? That everybody's read so much that we're no longer needed in the world. That would be the best case scenario. But I think people need to read. They need to, and frankly, I think people need to be out on the streets. I'm surprised that I'm excited by how many people are out in the streets and showing in numbers that they're not going to stand for this anymore. But I'm also surprised by all the people who aren't out there. And I understand COVID makes things complicated, but when I'm out here in New Orleans, I see young faces, and that makes me really excited, but I do not see people my age, and that makes me super nervous. And so I think that people do need to go out and show their support for this. I also think people need to support local organizations that are doing the work. And I think we need to have our ears open to hear what they need, to ask what the organizations that have been working on these issues for a long time need from us, no matter who we are, if we're new to coming into this field.
Ashley?
I'd say also by Black businesses, by businesses of color, and talk to those. So the fact that you're listening here, you're already kind of keyed in. Talk to your family, talk to your friends, you know the ones, your uncle buddies, and just bring up a conversation. And also talk to your children, right? And tell them that it's important to get involved and to think about these things and do things together, because they're the ones who are going to vote. The young folk that Laura is seeing, these are the ones who have come of age in an Obama era and whose first election was Trump, right? And so just the political letdown of, those who are going for Bernie or then Hillary and then to get Trump, they're the ones out in the street right now. And so you have to constantly think about movement building and helping the next generations think about their role in this struggle as well.
And this is true all over Europe as well. I mean, the rise of conservatism and authoritarianism around the globe, it's true in China, it's true in a lot of places, has got young people really shocked. And those of us who are older may feel jaded, like, oh, we've seen people march before. But I do think there's something different happening now, and we need to set aside whatever cynicism we have and try to have some hope.
Agreed.
Absolutely. Well, hope also is related often to humor. And you guys know that we have a joke section.
I know that.
Yeah.
I did know this. Yes. I did. I thought it was just for the one person who I watched tell a joke, and I was, dang. Okay. I'll think some. Okay. I got one.
Yeah. Okay.
I will tell a joke on behalf of a young person in my life who is 4 years old. So it's 4-year-old humor, but he thinks this is grand, like thinks it's so hilarious. Okay. People at home, I hope you're ready. I'm much funnier than this in real life. How do you catch a squirrel? Climb up a tree and act like a nut. I'm told this joke at least twice a day. It's a thing. Yeah.
This is beautiful. I love it. It's just my kind of joke. Okay, I have a joke. Laura, do you have one too? Yeah. Okay. Well, then I have a joke too.
Have you done 70 jokes?
Yeah.
This is episode 70. You've had a joke at everyone?
Sure.
Okay, I'm ready.
I impressed you, didn't I?
I'm blown away.
Well, this is a grad school joke. Okay. How many grad students does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
Only one, but it takes 9 years.
Awesome.
We've all been there, right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, this is so fun.
Guys, I want to thank you so much. By the way, congratulations on both of you, Ashley, to you for your short interview for the Time magazine recently, and also to you, Laura, for bringing out your second book on modern day slavery. Books and interviews are the things you should all be reading right now. And Ashley is also working on a book, which is coming out sometime soon, right?
Sometime soon, yes. Hopefully next year.
See, awesome. Yes. So guys, tune in because these folks are doing amazing work. They're at the front lines of the whole discourse. If you want to understand the details of what it means to be a racist or non-racist and how you can act and what you can learn about all of these issues, please tune into their work. They're awesome experts and they're lovely people and they have great jokes or none. But Laura, we know, is an extremely funny person. So guys, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Please stay in the line for a short after show party. Looking forward to that. And I'm going to say goodbye to everyone. Looking forward to another episode tomorrow about racism in Europe. So in the middle of Europe. And we're going to be talking to folks here about their day-to-day life, about how they experience racism on different levels. This is a very important discourse. We cannot stop having these discussions. We have to be honest about them, and we have to address them. And we're the folks who have the power and the means to change all of these issues. So, you know, we want to leave this world a better place for our kids. And that's why we have to act now. Thank you again for tuning in, and see you tomorrow.
Yay, thanks.